Hi there, it's Nicole Spohr here today for Simon Says Stamp with a couple of Be a Mermaid masked scene cards to share with you. These cards are exactly the same, I've just colored the hair and skin tones on the mermaids a little bit different, and I've shared the coloring for both. This card features only stamping and masking and absolutely no die cutting. Sometimes it's really fun not to have that white outline around your images. We're going to start with the Simon Says Stamp Beautiful Mermaids stamp set and stamp our image on smooth white cardstock. In addition to the mermaid, I'm also going to stamp some rock images from the Fawn Mermaid for You stamp set. I'm going to stamp these 3 times in the background. I want to make sure and leave enough room at the top for my sentiment from the Colorado Craft Company Be a Mermaid stamp set. These 2 cards are examples of mixing and matching many different companies and supplies for one card. It's one of my favorite ways to create. I'm going to start by stamping the mermaid and one of the rock images using Hero Art's Intense Black ink. Once I've stamped them, I'm going to go ahead and mask those images. So I will stamp those images on masking paper, cut those out with scissors, and then mask these images. I will use the same masks for both backgrounds. I want to stamp both backgrounds at the same time, as I don't have to move those images then from my MISTI to stamp them in exactly the same place. This is that masking paper that I was talking about that I've stamped those images on. After I've stamped the initial 2 images, I'm going to create masks. And I misspoke earlier. I stamped the rocks twice, not 3 times. She's sitting on a rock image, and then I've got 2 additional rock images, 1 on each side. After I've masked the images, I'm going to take some Post-it tape to use as the line between the sky and the water. I kind of want this to look like a cavern, if you will, so I've applied Tumbled Glass Distress ink in the center, Mermaid Lagoon along the sides, and these are the Distress Oxide inks, and then over that on each side I'm bringing in some Stormy Sky. These are being applied from each side. You'll see that I'll apply the water a little different. Then around the sides I applied some black soot distress ink. Over that, I'm going to take a Honeybee Stamps Ocean Scene Builder stencil and create some rays of light coming down. These are pretty harsh, so I always like to take a paper towel and buff that out just a little bit to soften the look. In addition, I want to spritz the background with a little water from a distress sprayer. And I'm going to do a little more blending over the top of this. Now I want to immediately dab that up because I don't want the water to sit on the masks very long. In fact, my Post-it tape mask tried to pull up the mask on the mermaid just a little bit, so I had to go really slow to pull that up. I need to keep the mask in place, and I'm going to put another piece of Post-it tape over that line, and now I want to start applying my water. We're going to use the exact same colors, just do a little bit different. I am keeping it lighter through the middle with the Tumbled Glass, Mermaid Lagoon, Stormy Sky, and Black Soot. This time we'll take a different Ocean Scene Builder stencil to give it that highlight look across the water there. Again, applying that applying white pigment ink through that stencil. We'll buff that out, but this time we won't spritz it with water from the distress sprayer. I'm going to carefully pull up my masks. I want to reuse these for the other card without having to restamp and cut those out, which is kind of time consuming. You can get probably 2, maybe 3 uses out of this if you're super careful, but probably not more than that. Now I'm ready to start coloring in my images. You could color those first and mask them if you want to, but I tend to like to mask them, do any of my background, inking, and then color in the images. That way, if anything happens, I haven't wasted a whole bunch of time coloring in the images. For this first mermaid, I'm using E00, 11, and 13 for the skin, with R20 for the cheeks. I'm going to keep using these colors and building it up until I get the exact kind of skin tone that I want. Once you start adding the color to the images, the scene really starts to come to life. As I add the skin tone, hair, and mermaid tail, you'll definitely start to see that. And then when we finish with the rocks, it really brings the whole thing together. For the hair, I'm starting with a base of E30. We're going to feather in E55 and E57 and even a little E31 to do some blending. I like to work my way up to a darker color when coloring hair, and I also don't want to over blend the hair. With mermaids, I often like to do something kind of fun and funky, but I went with a little bit more traditional hair colors, more like what you would do with a traditional image maybe, rather than something like that. But it is a fun idea if you want to consider coloring in their hair with some fun aquas or purples or reds, oranges, whatever that might be. I always think that's a super fun look, especially with mermaids. I'm trying to concentrate the darkest portions of the feathering where the hair would naturally be darkest. In a few areas, I felt like I overblended, so I will go back in with my darker markers and add in some more of that feathering. There were a couple places that just looked way too messy for me, so I ended up kind of blending that out with E31 and then going back in. I also found a couple of spots on the skin that needed fixed. Here's that darker marker where we're going to add in that nice dark look, adding highlights where we don't pull the dark color all the way to the dark color from the other side. Next comes the fun part, coloring in that mermaid tail and her seashell top and clamshell in her hair. What I love to do is usually do something definitely bright and funky. I kept both the same on both cards, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm just changing skin tone and hair color. So both mermaid tails and tops are going to be exactly the same. I used my favorite, I call it purple color combination, but it's in the blue color family, which is B60, 63, 66, and 69. It definitely has a little bit more of a purplish tint to it. I laid down a base color of B60, and then I pulled in B66 and I'm blending out with B63. We'll go back in and add B69 in some of those areas as well. I want to keep some nice lighter areas, so I'm trying not to pull out that color too far. The tips of the tails and then where kind of her knees are in that mermaid tail. There's a lot of colorless blender in B60, so you want to be careful that it doesn't bleed outside the lines by oversaturating the paper. I'll keep fussing with the colors and getting that shading just the way I want it to look before moving on to her top and her hair accessory. For the top, I'm using RV66 and RV69. These are red-violet colors, and I really like the kind of magenta look of these. It blends in nicely with the colors of the water in the cavern and the sky, as well as the mermaid tail. I'm also going to take a black glaze pen and go over the eyes on the mermaid and let that dry. I'm taking a white pen and adding detail to the mermaid tail for additional interest. I even added some to the fins. Once the eyes are dry, I'm going to go back in and add the highlights into the eyes to really make her face pop. For the rocks, we're using E40 as the base, and then we're going to use some darker colors, E43, 44, 47, and 49. I will use a combination of these throughout. Most of that E40 gets covered up, but I like to use it as a base. it allows for me to have a nice little highlight area. So I'm trying to kind of keep the center of the rock area lighter. A lot of that will actually be colored over with E43, but it gives that illusion of a highlight, much like the water or the light filtering through into this cavern. The rock she's sitting on, we want to color that too. There's several little rocks here. Adding in all of that dark color. Once I have all of the little dark areas, and you can see that I went over them multiple times, adding in darker shading, just building the color up. You can always add more color, but it's very hard to remove. It's about this time that you can really see how amazing this little underwater cavern type mermaid scene is going to look. I'll go ahead and color in the final rock, and then I want to add some additional stamping to add more interest. You guys know how much I love to create a complete full scene. That's going to include adding some fish in the water down below, and then we'll add that great stamping up above. Plus we're going to add some bubbles. Those will all be finishing details as we get towards the end of coloring and building both of these background scene cards. The little fish that I'm going to use to fill in is actually a solid fish image from the Lawn Fawn Mermaid for You stamp set. I also felt like I needed to pull the white highlight area down just a little bit into the water. So I pulled that down a little bit further with my stencil and of course buffed that out with a dry paper towel. Once that's done, I can start adding those fish. I chose to go ahead and just do a solid fish image to make it super easy. And like they are underneath the water. We're using the black soot Distress Oxide ink to stamp multiple fish throughout the design. These will fade and soften a little bit as the ink completely dries and absorbs into the paper. Let's go ahead and color the second mermaid. We're going to use E11, 13, 15, and R20 for the skin tone on this mermaid. You can see that I created the background just like I did with the first one, with the cavern, the light filtering down through, and the water as well as the highlights. I went ahead and already pulled more of that white pigment ink through the Honeybee Stamps Ocean Scene Builder light filtering stencil. So I pulled those little light filters all the way down near the bottom. The benefit of already creating one of these backgrounds was knowing that I wanted to do that. For the base of her hair color, I'm using E55. Very little of this is actually going to show through, but again, I like to start light and work my way up. I wasn't exactly sure which colors of markers I wanted to use, and so I used an assortment of them to build up and get that color exactly the way I wanted it to look. This is the E29, which kind of, to me, has a little bit of a red undertone. And I want it to I like that, but I want it to have a little bit darker for shading. So I'm going to cover a lot of that E55 with this, where it almost ends up being my base color. And the E55 is almost a highlight. because it's quite a bit lighter than I originally intended. We'll take some E79, and I didn't really love the E79 a lot, so we'll actually go with E49 to build up that dark hair color. This is going to be my darkest color and add that most dramatic shading. We'll go through all of her hair, adding in all those dark areas before switching back to a lighter marker color to blend that out and soften the edges just a little bit. This is E59. And I'll go back in with E49 and just draw in a few little areas to darken it that I'm not going to blend out. Again, going over the eyes with a black pen, letting that dry before we go back with a white pen and add in the highlight. RV 66 and 69 for her top and her hair accessory. And then B60, 63, 66, and 69 for the mermaid tail. I really love that both colors of mermaid tail and top look good with whichever skin tone you want. These are really great colors that go with many, many different designs. These are two of my favorite color combinations. We're coloring this, as I mentioned, just like before, including the rocks that are going to be colored with those E40, 43, 44, 47, and 49 markers. We're keeping it all the same except for the hair and skin. I'm going to quickly color in those rocks just like I did before and add the fish. Once the background ink is completely dry, I'm going to put my sentiment from the Colorado Craft Company Be a Mermaid stamp set on the top portion of the card. The sentiment reads, "Always be yourself unless you can be a mermaid, then definitely ... And we're going to stamp that with a clear embossing ink and heat emboss with white embossing powder so that it really pops off of this dark blue background. I'm going to heat set this, and then of course the rest of the sentiment is going to be on the inside of the card. This is a great way to finish off the inside of the card with a sentiment. We're going to take our white pen and add detail to the eyes of the fish in the water. I even took some blue markers and added in a little bit more detailing to where I inked with Distress Oxide ink. I just colored over that with my Copic markers. I'm going to take a top fold card base and pop my scene right in place. I kept adding to this scene as I was working. As I mentioned earlier, I decided I wanted to have some bubbles up high. First, I am going to embellish her mermaid tail. I love a sparkly mermaid tail, and the Nuvo Crystal Drops in White Blizzard is an iridescent, sparkly liquid that is so fantastic for this. I'm applying a thin layer all over her mermaid tail and fins, which is going to be sparkly but still show through the beauty of the coloring underneath. I've also added a layer of glossy accents to her top and the accent in her hair so that they are glossy and raised and have lots of detail as well. Once that is completely dry, I am going to stamp sentiments on the inside of the card with the Be a Mermaid sentiment from the Colorado Craft Company Be a Mermaid stamp set. I've stamped that with the Mermaid Lagoon ink, and then I stamped The World is Your Oyster, also from that same stamp set, with black ink underneath. This is a great encouragement style card for anyone, especially those mermaid lovers in your life. I've done the same thing on both cards. Finally, I did stamp bubbles up in the sky. These are from the Fawn Mermaid, these are from the Simon Says Stamp Beautiful Mermaids stamp set. I stamped and embossed them in white and then filled them in with glossy accents so that they would really shine. This fills in the top portion of the card that only really features the stamped sentiment. I'll set these cards aside to completely dry, and my Be a Mermaid cards are all finished. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for these Be a Mermaid cards featuring mixing and matching stamps from many different companies. The supplies I used to create both cards are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more videos featuring Simon Says Stamps and Dies that you might be interested in. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel to never miss a video. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and we'll catch you next time.